Right. I didn't expect to start like 1 minute early, but Kalimera, good morning and welcome. Thanks for choosing this room. We have two rooms, so once again, thanks for choosing the responsive web design over the lottery stuff. And then, okay, I think just a sec. I was a bit nervous, so this thing was out of my pocket. Right, let's get right into it. Is it not working? Give me a moment, sorry. I was not expecting that. Okay, should work now. Right, so as we know, the web was invented by Tim Berners-Lee in the 90s, even though there's a lot of things has been changing. But the concept of client and server and browser stay the same until now. And initially, there is a set of browser. So Internet Explorer is one of them. Not sure if any of you still be there at that time, but I was like 3 years old when this was launched on 1995. And initially, we built layout using HTML table. So yeah, that's how it looked like, I think, long time ago. So it's just table stuff. And you get the whole website. And let's recall Flash for a while, right? It used to be very interactive way to build kind of animation. And then gradually it's going to be adapted to build kind of website. So there's an interaction between links and all, but you just couldn't really select anything on the Flash file because it's literally as an animation. And so come to the year of 2000, then you start to approach the era of mobile web browser, and then as you can see on the screen, there is quite a bit of UI, but it usually lacking the desktop functionality and UI element. So you has to specifically build the website for mobile. It started with M or something, and this kind of Facebook and then YouTube is still live. You can still use it today, but it's designed for the era before. And so I think the moment started really get a momentum is in 2007 when Steve Jobs introducing the iPhone, where it has the desktop-like browsing experience, and also the iPhone is really intuitive touch interface. That's why people start to use mobile to browsing the web a lot more, comparing to the era before that. But as you can see, the experience here is look okay. It's kind of it's working, but imagine you need to zooming in and zooming out really often. It's quite annoying, to be honest. So that's really set the discussion, like we should have the unified experience on the mobile and on the desktop the same. And in the year of 2010, there is an article called Responsive Web Design. And have you read this article? Just raise your hand. Okay, that's 1, 2, 5. So that is the article was setting the term responsive web design. Before that, we can call it whatever. But then this article was, proposing a new approach to seamlessly design for mobile and desktop. And then it's outlining 3 fundamental principles. So it is fluid grid, flexible image, and CSS media query. And yeah, I think we stopped at 2010, and since then, we got Flexbox media query a few years later. And then in 2017, we got, okay, actually, before that, we got a lot of JavaScript framework during that time. And 2017, where CSS Grid is out. That is interesting. So when you think about responsive web design, usually that is a design, and the way you think about it is like on mobile, it might need to look a bit different. So the hero might be wrapped into a new line. The card is going to be stacked. The font size might be smaller, and then the header is going to be collapsing. So this approach where you write code, where it looks good on desktop, and then you write additional code to make it look good on mobile. We call it mobile first No, sorry, desktop first. I was with too ego. So the next one, you can write code so that it look good on mobile, and then you write code to make it look good on desktop. So then that is approach is called mobile first, right? So that the mobile don't have to pass additional CSS stuff. And today, I would say there's more when you think about responsive. So it's not just about the device size anymore. So we will cover responsive to the content, to the viewport, to the container, and to the user preferences. We go through each one of them. And before getting into the content, I'm Trung. I'm the Google developer in Angular, and then I build a few open source projects around Angular community. I came all the way from Singapore, so it took me like 16 hours. If you see my voice was a bit tipsy because I think the jet lag is start to kick in. So that's Singapore on the map, very tiny. Then I come from a country nearby called Vietnam. Visit us if you have a chance. And at the moment, I stay in the company in Singapore. We build loyalty platform called Ascenda, and really to simplify loyalty for enterprises. And so we get into the first part. Yeah, the first part I think is the easiest. So essentially, responsive to the content is just writing code so that it accumulates different content length, right? It doesn't get overflowing or it doesn't really break when the content is longer, for example. In this case, we get when the text is latest article, it looks really nice and all. But then when the text is like latest article in text, it still looks nice. Just the link is gonna wrap into a new line. So that is all about responsive to the content. And we take an example in my application. So that is, there's a top, as you can see. Top album look good. Mood and moment look also really good. So the code for it is essentially just the div. Outside, it is a flag. But then here we don't really have a flag yet. So it's just a div with a H3 and an A. And when you start to add flags, it tries to put things in the same row. That's what flags are by default. So, and it's just to stick to each other. And then when you want to have a space between them, you do justify content space between. So it's going to be on top, right, and then left, two sides. And when the text is longer, as you can see, it still tries to squeeze themselves into one line. So both the title and the link is breaking. So you can see it a bit more clearly on the depth tool. That's how it looks. And simply, if we just add flag wrap, that's it. It just breaks into a new line, right? So now it's just expand if you can. And then if there's not enough space in one row, I'll just try to wrap myself. So that is flag wrap all about. And I think most of you should know about that already. It's just that out of many options that we had, flag wrap seems to be the only thing that kind of makes sense. Like absolute float display table. Only flag wrap kind of has this capability to wrap things into new line without anything else. So that is the first takeaway. Flag wrap, you will never use it, but I would assume you own has used flag wrap. So the next one is a bit more interesting. You look into the form and then notice how the form behaves when I shrink it down. When it shrink it down, we had a text box, two text box, and one button. And then at a point in time, the button is breaking down into one line. A bit more, then there's one row of text box and one row of text box and button. And at a point, it's treating separately in each row. And I was like, first when I look into this kind of example, I thought we need some kind of media query or something. But in fact, you're just still using flag and flag wrap. But then there's, interesting stuff is in the next few lines here, as you can see, name, email, and button. So we are putting something we call flag basis. And flag basis is like rarely you see someone use when you're writing CSS code. It is really rare. I never really seen it. Maybe you with instead of basis. But you still use with, you don't use basis. So here we're setting a few number. And For now, it doesn't really make sense, but it's going to make sense in the next slide. So here we have 160, 220, and 80. And then when you look into the form itself, there is like 160, there is 220, and there's 80. And then because we put a gap between the child element, so, and you can think there's 3 elements, so there has to be 2 gaps between them. So that is like 16 times 2. And it has come to a magic number we call 492. It's just out of nowhere. But after this 492, for example, 491, and it starts to break it down. So that is all about flex basis. So it's trying to set an ideal, size of the flex children. And then if it doesn't match, then it's try to do something else. So to get in detail is very complicated, but think about it this way, right? You have setting a few number and depends on how it's calculation. Then you suddenly has a very flexible form, and it's really flexible. And this one doesn't use any kind of media queries or anything. So that is cool. I mean, so hope you think that is cool as well. But for me, the first time I saw it built with flex basis, I was really mind blown. And yeah, the good old day was like, before flex, we need to use CSS float a lot, and it's just a pain. So it's just to remind you of the past. You've never been to that era, then that's fine, no worries. So next up, responsive to the viewport. I think that is easier, it's more common. So responsive to the viewport is essentially, you want to how to say, like you want certain element is reactive based on the device sizes. So here I have the header, it's full width. So it makes sense when on the mobile, the header is responding based on the viewport, on the width. In this case, we use max width. But width is the most common use case, right? You rarely see high. But high has also there's use case as well. So in some use cases, you want to have a sticky navbar. But then when the device is on the landscape mode, you just don't want to have this fixed navbar. So that's more content. So you can use high in this use case. But then the old days, when we are designing, for some reason, it's like we decided on like 12 column grid. And then that's taken from Bootstrap kind of idea. And we look into one example. So here, I had just a container called row, and inside there just a lot of codes SM, and then we call 6. And then that's the code, how it look. So you set a flag of 50%. So as you can see on the UI, it's like 2 columns. So it's 12 columns in total. So if you say 6, it has to take 50% of the width. And then if you wanted to say, I want to have more column when the screen size is bigger, you put the code, but then now it's medium, MD4. And then the code for it is like, when the min width is this big, you are going to set different width, different sizes. That's how it works, essentially. Very simple. And now, what we can do, because we had flex, but before we get into it, that's how I render it, by the way. So it's just a very simple loop. You don't just copy and paste and render. You do a loop, and then there's a container outside, I would say. And then when I have the card grid, and then I put in, like when it's just, here is like by default, that's how it's rendered, without anything. So if I put display grid, interestingly, nothing happened, really. So it's not like flex, it's not trying to squeeze things together. When you put it display grid, nothing is gonna happen. It's just the same thing. And so for now, I just put in a gap of 1.5 RAM, so there's a space, as you can see, with the arrow. And yeah, that's it. That's what you do, really. The thing interesting happened when only you set a grid template column. So let's say you want, 2 columns when the screen size is this big, and then here you have it 2 columns when it's like 768. And then you want 3 columns when it's a bit bigger, you for sure can do, right? 124. 10, 24 pixels, sorry, not 100. So you have 3 columns, very nice. And you might ask like, here, just see, when it's just expanding, there's more and more columns get rendered. Just you see it. And, okay, it's a bit long. I try to do it slow, but it seems to be too long. And then if you say, okay, I have a bigger screen, what I do? I just keep adding stuff in, right? 4, 5, 6. That's what we do really. And I still seeing people doing it. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that seems to be, this approach is assuming on the device sizes. And we just review the code. So here we have row, and then we have also this row, but then this flex and grid. And on the media, we're setting the width of the children. So you very specifically targeting the children. But for the new approach, you just say like the container itself. So you tell the container to say like how many columns you want. So you don't tell the children like how big it is. You just tell the container. So that's the differences. But what different even more is like, it doesn't really work well when you are having other elements that can also change the sizes. For example, I have the resizable navbar, and then when I resize it, even though the content essentially is trying to squeeze 3 items into the same row, but because we have this constraint of device sizes, so nothing happens. It's still 3 columns, no matter what, because the screen is the same. And it doesn't really work very well. I mean, it's kind of okay, but it could be better, I would say. And so in display grid, this has a really interesting property. So we can just take the whole code, all of this, everything, into one line. So you don't say specifically how many columns you want. You just say auto fit and auto fill. So there's 2 properties. We go into it. But instead you say, okay, I want each children to be minimum of 200 pixels. And then one FI is basically it can expand. If there's, between 2 and 3, there's some space, it's expanding. But the whole code we wrote before can replace it with a single line of code. That is the interesting point, single line of code. And so I call it RAM, easier, repeat, auto, and something, min-max. Hope it's easy to remember. And so when you see, right, it is still working when you are changing the size, for sure, because the size is changing, and then the grid is able to figure it out how many columns it is going to render. Depends on the size. And also, when I shrink the navbar, because now we tell the grid to automatically determine the number of columns, so it can still work as well. So it's really nice. I think that's really neat. And that's how many code you just shrink down into one line, and then it's still working. So yeah, that's the takeaway of this second the agenda about viewport. So you can see there's 2 properties, autofill and autofit. Autofill is basically if there's more space to render a few more items, you just don't care. You just render, like let's say I have 4 items, you just render 4, that's it. But if you have 4 and there's more to render 1 more here, autofit is just try to expand X item. So think about if you have 1 only, this is going to be really huge. Yeah, it is easier in this example where I have only 4, the same 4, but then the first one is 1 is missing. It just keep as a placeholder. It doesn't do anything with it. And then below, it tries to fit itself. So you can see that the width is different, 200 and 256, I think. Yeah, 256. So yes, this is working. I like it a lot. I hope. Anyone know about this before? I mean, maybe, yes, a few. So I think it still has the room for others to know about it. And yeah, that's the takeaway for the second one. And then the good old days before we have a gap. Yeah, if you've been there, I just don't say anything. But if you've been there, you will understand. The gap now we have with grid and flex is making things so much easier. Yeah, You've been there, you know how painful it is. So we can have a discussion later. Yeah, it's Next one, something new, responsive to container, right? Basically, responsive to the container is like a new tool that you can style the component based on the available space, where it is fitting. So at the moment, we are likely building, you know, kind of reusable component and design system. So that is why it is interesting. So here, let's say I have the card, and when it is in the grid with a lot of spaces, I want it to be like, you know, an image, and then the content below, I call it vertical. But then when it is existing on its own, and the space is just so much bigger, I don't want it to be has, you know, a huge cover anymore. I want it to be side by side, you know, on the left and on the right, easy. So before that, before container query, you likely need to kind of calculate the width in JavaScript or something, and then, you know, media observer and stuff. So container query is something to let you do it. So we stop here. You know, all of the stuff we talked about before was like stop in 2017, nothing new. But container query is really something new in 2023, Valentine's Day. For some reason, it's made available on Facebook on Valentine's Day. So we look into the same kind of you know, player that we have, and I think the tech is very small, but you don't have to look into. So someone complaining that, you know, the button when it is smaller when the screen size is smaller, it's just wrapping. It doesn't look good. But that's not something that's caught my eye. I fixed it kind of easy. But what caught my eye is really, and you can see here, when you are in a smaller size, the card is so big. You only can fit like one card, 1.5. And then it doesn't really make sense for the mobile user. Or someone who prefer to, you know, have the music player half of the screen, or 1/3 of the screen. You know, you never know. There's people who are using it. So we look into, like, you know, all of the code here, very similar, right? We have a grid. We use the same technique that we just mentioned. And then it's rendered nicely. You know, one line of code, okay, just show you again. 3 lines of code, display grid, 1 line of grid template column, and then the gap, and it's rendered the grid nicely. That's it. And it's work on different screen size. But on this specific kind of viewport, it was really huge. Now I think it's easier to see. It's obvious. So how do you fix it? Actually, it's quite simple. But first, let's look into how the code look like. So here you can see there's a card, and then there is a cover, and then there is a card body. And you can see here, there's an image, and then below there's a content. Very simple. We haven't adding anything. It's just by default working like that. And I just put in the padding so that there's, you know, there's a side here. There's a bit of space. It's not touching the edge. And then I put in flag. And then it's interesting that when I put flag, then for some reason the cover was missing. And because I was using some kind of background cover technique, so it doesn't really have the size. When it put in flag, it's just collapsing. It's not there anymore. So I was changing back to flag direction column, and then putting the gap so that there is nice gap here. It's not too obvious, I would say, but you can see there's a bit of space between. So we can use gap for it. And so the first solution, right? I come back to media query. So I set the direction to be a row, you know, and then there's a line item sender, and then I set the size so that it doesn't collapse anymore. I hope it makes sense. And then, and you can see on the right side, right? Now it's look much better. You have seen like 5 items in the screen. So much better than just 1.5. And we get the same emoji because it doesn't really work well. So it doesn't really work well when you have some kind of element that can change the size, because we just stick into the media query. It's really a device sizes. So to show you how it looks, so here I had enough space to render like one thing, but when I try to make it bigger, and then it has 2 columns. Actually, when it can render 2 columns. I don't want to have this kind of vertical. This vertical only look good when it is very, huge. When there's 2 columns, I still want the same top to bottom, like vertical kind of layout that I have before. So it doesn't really work because we use media query. And then if this screen size, it doesn't string, and it only string on one element of the page, it doesn't really work well. And so that is how CSS container query can solve. But before we get into it, we get something called range query. Very interesting. Anyone has like a hard time trying to interpret what is max width and what is min width sometimes? Like, is it above or is it below? I was having really a hard time, right? So now the easiest is that you can use a mathematical size. Making things so much easier. You see that is a smaller size, you know that is smaller. So it's not max width. Max seems to be like not that click into the mind. It's not very, it's not something that interactive for me. Yeah. So with range queries, it's really makes things easier to understand. For example, here I have min width and have max width. So essentially, it's the range between. So you can start to apply it maybe. Okay, we get back to the code. And then, it's just really a code-centric presentation. So with container query, so we get back to the previous one. So without container query, it's like that, right? It's just there's a card, and then there is media something. And then with container query, I actually wanted to introduce a wrapper of the whole card. I call it card container. And then what I do is like I say container of something. So the card here is basically a name, and inline size is a type. So I cut down quite a number of slides to talk about container type and container and name and stuff. But basically, there's 2 properties, inline size and size. So inline size is really, in 90% of the case, we just talk about width, right? You care about the width. Size, you can query both the width and the height. Put it this way, easier. But it's not really just width and height. It's something else, logical property. And when you have this setting the container and then you start to query it, you are able to start to query the width of the container using add container. And then because the container here, we only query the div, so we have to shrink the number here. So it's not like 7 something, the whole device size anymore. Now it needs to be the content that we want. So we just put 2A2 because that's how it looked before. So one comparison, right? So we had very similar syntax, right? Add media, and then here just add container, and the rest were the same. But one important is like you need to define a container. That is the first step. So if you put in the add container and then there's no container around, it just doesn't understand what you are trying to query. So device width is like easier because there's only one thing. That is a device thing. Container, it is gonna work based on the hierarchical. So it's the closest one, and if it doesn't have, let's go to the next one, up and up and up. So yeah, very important. And then now, just to show you, it's kind of working. When it can render 2 columns, then it get back to the size that I want again. Because I put the number was like 2A2, so here's like 210. Right, 210 is smaller than 2A2. It doesn't apply the vertical thing. It's only when it is really huge. It's so big, then it can apply the next thing. So yeah. And then when you build the component using container good enough, then you can have something really flexible, something like that, without any line of JavaScript. So one variant, another one where the cover is bigger, and we can get the big one. when it has enough screen, it looks just so good. Yes, and then when you have the component that can isolate itself, and then the container query do the job for you, then you might just reuse the same component in 2 places. And then depending on the width, let's say depending on the available space around, then it's gonna decide what to apply. So in this case, I only use the same component. I don't really put any Boolean to say it needs to be vertical, it needs to be horizontal. But then it can still render based on the space, which is, for me, is cool. Yeah, that is one of the most requested features in CSS for the longest time. So I don't have enough time to really dive into detail, but I hope you get an idea, and then you can explore after that. So like I mentioned, there's really 2 steps. The first one, you need to define some kind of container type, name it, or the shorthand container. We will not go into it very deep today, but you get the idea. And the second one, just you add container to query the stuff. That's it. And since we have some time, let's show a quick demo. Yeah? Sorry. So that is the application I built. Okay, then there's hello Thessaloniki. See? Nice, huh? Do you listen to Westlife? And then that's just now the example with container query. That is a form, as you can see, shrink it a bit. Using only flex, quite neat. Eh? Sorry, how to make it? Okay, just a sec, sorry. Eh? I think I just couldn't really enable it. Okay. Sorry. Come talk to me after. The setup was a bit different. It's not mirroring. Eh? Okay, then come talk to me. I show you the demo. Essentially, it is live. You can go in anytime. There's a lot more use cases you can see, right? The link here, I'm gonna show you later. You don't have to, type it. One of the very common examples that I usually put for container is like, you might have this newsletter sign up thing on the page, and maybe it's gonna display on the model, or it's gonna display below the blog post that you wrote. And now with container query, you just has one single component you call it newsletter. Doesn't matter you write using React or Angular, but then it can just fit itself. Right. The logic is the same. You click a button, it sends something to the server. But then, how you are gonna, has this layout, sorry, in the same row, it's gonna deciding by CSS. And then, anything if you can do with CSS, maybe then just do it within CSS and without JavaScript, because JavaScript is expensive, like we said. So yeah, I think that's a really strong point. Browser compatibility. Like I mentioned, is it a highlight? No, sorry. That's here. February 14, so it's Valentine. Okay? Mark my word, I didn't make it up. And then we have most of the major browsers has supported. Right? You can try it now. But the thing is, like, to make something like this to production, it's not that simple. So you need at least maybe like 95% of the user is, on the latest browser before you can roll it out to production, for example. But then, if it is the case and you wanted to try, I suggest you highlight you to try it out. But then, maybe add a polyfill, for staging environment, not for prod, I think at least for now. And the key takeaway, really, to enable container query, there's 2 steps. Container type and container, easy. Last pieces, thanks for saying. I know it's lunchtime and then people are hungry. But last piece is about user preference. So now you suddenly have the capability to, toggle a lot of things on your operating system. For example, you prefer the dark theme. Do anyone using light theme here in VS Code or any editor? Maybe not. Oh, there is one. Awesome. 2. But I still prefer dark. Yeah. When you get to black, you just cannot go back. But, you configure the operating system and say, I want the dark theme, but you are browsing at like till like midnight, then it is not, it's not that ideal scenario. So what we want is like really to respect the user, configuration, so that it makes the experience so much better, right? The example of dark theme and light theme is so much related, because I think it's not like 100% of the website outside is start to use like, dark theme and apply anything to it. But yeah, we would prefer to have, the code to respect user decision. And it's just not dark and white. But, as you can see here, when you turn it, it's kind of changing. CSS is very reactive. No, it's not JavaScript. So CSS is very reactive. The toggle, it changes, it's apply a new style, easy. But there's a lot more. That's the thing. There's a lot more than just dark theme and white theme. So you can say, okay, I want to invert the color. So that you need to apply a certain kind of thing. You have reduced motion. Some people, they're really sick when you see an animation. It is a nice touch, but for some people, like, maybe has a certain cognitive load, it just doesn't really work well. So that's reduced motion. Then there's increased contrast. You prefer to have a bit more contrast. You see things a bit more clear when there's a so bright environment. And then there's reduced transparency. So there's no opacity and thing. And really, to apply some of that, you can think about, right? You can, let's say, you just turn off everything when they turn it on. For example, when the user turn on that they don't want the animation, just turn off everything. It's very aggressive, but maybe it works. Or you can use a progressively enhanced approach where you say, when there's no preference here, then I apply some of the code. Yeah, maybe that is a bit more relaxed instead of just turn off everything. So that is 2 suggestions for you. Whatever you're doing, you decide, depends on the majority of the user is using it. But if there's a lot of user, maybe you can decide between 1 or 2. So yeah, that's a takeaway for the last pieces. And I think we are coming to an end, right? So we start on 91 with just HTML, and then you start thinking based on property, and everything need to be kept for some reason. It needs to be body. It's not like small thing. Interesting, right? And then you set the size and the color is a attribute. And then you have CSS, make things so much easier to reuse. And we came a long way. We had like even Photoshop can run on the web now. I think there's a web assembly talk yesterday, but it's outside the browser. So yeah, you've been there, you understand. That's just a tremendous moment for the web. And we are here, 2023. 2023, there's a lot more. There's just so many exciting stuff. I would say there is the hash stuff you can try. There's nesting that comes from SCSS. There's view transition, was really cool. There is style query, and then container query is I put as a highlight. But now there's still more and more things to come. And if you ask me about the future-proof responsive web design, that might look like that. You might have the one that reactive to the content, writing the code to handle different content length using all the technique we said, track route, track basis, and RAM could be useful. And then there's a container query now. You can try to use it. If this doesn't work well, you can use, look for viewport, the media that we use, and the one outside is a preference. So here you have it. 4 kind of, I should make it up, but I hope it makes sense. And yeah, F. Caristo, I hope you enjoy it.